Everybody. I hope you're all well. So I just, the thing with teaching Torah is that sometimes you're forced to keep it real. So I just spilled this big glass of water all over the desk where my computer is and my notes are. And now I have to get on and be this totally calm and collected and understanding and wise person. Fortunately, I had enough time to be the angry, frustrated person that I was when the water spilled just before this moment. So I've taken care of that, and now I can be the wise presence that I'm going to try to be. Okay, here we go. So there are two ways that we can approach today's subject. And yes, thank you, Mel, Rabbi Sir. There are two ways to approach today's subject, or many ways, but one of the ways that I could approach it, and this is going to be the road not taken, is to give you a synthetic presentation on the subject of forgiveness. I want, of course, to teach about that subject, but I want to put some emphasis today on how we read Jewish sources and how we read those sources as Torah Chaim, the Torah of life. In my own life, there was a certain point where I realized that I knew a lot of Torah. I'd studied a lot of Tanakh and Talmud and other texts, but I was forced to ask myself, to what extent am I living these texts? To what extent am I, as Abraham Joshua Heschel put it, a text person? Am I embodying the texts that I've studied? And that's been my goal ever since that moment of realization. So I'm going to focus on this, which is to invite you to look at certain texts, some of which I'm sure are familiar to many, most, maybe all of you, and to see how we can read them as Torah Chaim, as living Torah, and help us with this subject. The first thing we have to say, I think, about forgiveness is, and I'm being presumptuous here, but really, I don't think any of us really knows what we mean when we use that word. I mean, it's one of those words that we use all of the time, but I think very few of us can say with a sense of clarity what it is that we mean when we say we are seeking forgiveness and what it is that we grant when we forgive. And that's one of my main goals today, is to help us gain some clarity on that question so that forgiving becomes possible and useful. And I also want to say that one of the things that's always very, very important to me is to use Jewish language. So what is the language, what is the word that the rabbis used for forgiveness? The rabbinic word that I would say is used most often for forgiveness is mechila. Now, mechila is actually from the world of finance. Mechila literally is about forgiving a debt. Mechila originally is about forgiving a debt. If you know the so-called Lord's Prayer, you know that the original Lord's Prayer is, forgive us our debts as we forgive those who have debts to us. The idea of mechila in the realm of forgiveness is that I am saying, you owe me something. You, the person who has hurt me, who has offended me, owe me something. And you're never going to be able to pay your debt to me. Because when we've hurt someone, question is, Lord's Prayer, Christian prayer, No, it's a Jewish prayer that appears in the Gospels. Give me a second here. One of the problems of forgiveness is that we can't do a rewind. Whatever we did was done. So forgiveness is not about erasing, saying that something didn't happen. And that, in that sense, it's like forgiving a debt. What do I mean by that? When I forgive a debt, when I forgive a debt that someone owes me, I'm not saying that you don't owe it to me. You do owe it to me. What I'm saying is, I'm not demanding that you pay me back. The debt is there, the obligation is there, but you don't have to pay me back. And in the case of forgiveness, that has to be the case if we are to move forward, because you can never pay me back. How can you pay me back? You can't undo what you did. Julia, how can I make myself, I'm seeing you, or I'm seeing Joshua as the main screen here.
You might have him pinned, so in the upper right corner of his box, you can unmute him. Does that work? Sorry, unpin him. Did that work? And do you have gallery view selected?
Let me try gallery view. Okay. All right. That's okay. Thank you. Okay. So let's figure out forgiveness by talking about what it is that let's start from the point of view of the person who seeks forgiveness. Because at this point, it is important to say that there is an important divide, although not as sharp as divide as it is sometimes presented, between Christian notions of forgiveness as they are generally taught and Jewish notions of forgiveness as they are generally taught, which is that in Christian discussions of forgiveness, the discussion usually starts with the forgiver. In Jewish discussions of forgiveness, the discussion generally starts with the potential forgivee, person who is seeking forgiveness. Because the Jewish assumption is that if I hurt you, if I sin against you, I have the obligation to seek your forgiveness. And you may forgive me even if I don't seek forgiveness. What that means we'll talk about. But you have no obligation to forgive me unless and until I seek forgiveness. So what is it really that I'm seeking when I'm seeking forgiveness? So one of the things that's crucial is, and I know Rabbi Andelman, I don't know if you spoke about this already or you are going to be speaking about this, but the whole process always has to begin with vidui, with acknowledgement, which really means it has to begin with honesty. Because part of the problem with forgiveness is I have to be willing to be totally honest with myself and with the other person about what I did. It can't be something like, if I offended you, I'm sorry. Or if you found that offensive, I'm sorry. That's not seeking forgiveness. Seeking forgiveness has to involve an act of vidui, which we usually translate as confession, but as I've said many times, I think should be translated as acknowledgement. Acknowledging what we already know to be true. And let's see that in the sources. Let's take a look. Can we put the sources up? And look at the first page, page number 1, where the Rambam, I mean,
Just give me 1 second, Elizer. I'm going to share the
Sure, sure. Okay.
People have the sources as well on their own, so I think
Okay.
you can go
All
ahead.
right, so I'm going to get started because, as our rabbis say, time is short and the work is great. So it begins by saying, I guess this is on the second page. Yeah, all commandments of the Torah, whether they be mandatory or prohibitive, if a man, read person, violates any one of them, either presumptuously or erroneously, when the person repents and turns away from the sinful way, one is obliged to confess before the Blessed Holy One. Even as it is said, when a man or woman shall commit any sin, they shall confess their sin which they have done, which is a confession of words. And let's see what the nature of the confession is as it's described by Maimonides, by Rambam. Such confession is a mandatory commandment. How is the verbal confession made? The sinner says thus, I beseech you, great name. I have sinned. I have been obstinate. I've committed profanity against you, particularly in doing thus and such. Now behold, I have repented and am ashamed of my actions. Forever will I not relapse into this thing again. So notice all of the elements here, okay? One is, I have sinned. What did I do? What did I do? And this is sometimes not as clear to people as it ought to be. I always talk about how when I was in Yeshiva High School, we were in the dormitory, and we had payphones back then, and some students would use slugs or various devices to make phone calls without having to pay for the phone call. And sometimes, and like I would say to a classmate, but you're not paying for the phone call. And they would say, well, it's AT&T, they have so much money, it's not a big deal, they're not going to miss it. But the thing is, there's a name for what they did. It's called theft. It's theft. Just as sure as if you take something out of somebody's hand. So the first part of vidui is to be honest about what we did. Okay. And this is very often hard for us to do. The next thing is when Rambam says, I have been obstinate, committed profanity, we need to understand the depth of the thing that we did. In other words, let's say that I said about a colleague in front of a third party, well, my colleague's actually not that good at what he or she does. They're kind of mediocre. So what was my sin? So you could say, the sin is that I disparaged you. Well, that's accurate, but it's not complete. Because part of my acknowledgement has to be, and I hurt you, I must have hurt you really, really deeply when I said that. So it is the act, but it is understanding the deep consequences of that which I did. And the truth is, speaking for myself, when I mess up and when I hurt someone else or do something to hurt somebody else, one of the reasons that I have a hard time taking that second step is because of the next thing that the Rambam says, which is, I am ashamed of my actions. When we actually have to look at the consequences of what we have done, it's not pretty. And it's hard for us to look at. And one of the reasons that people don't, it seems like a paradox, but one of the reasons that people don't seek forgiveness is that in some part of themselves, they're only too aware of how terrible the thing was that they did. Sometimes people are blissfully unaware. They don't know there's anything, but often enough we are aware. And to have to look at that and to feel the shame that we feel when we know how deeply we've hurt somebody, that's a very, very hard thing to live with. But that's something that we have to do. So we have to name it. We have to be 100% clear about what it was that we did. We have to be 100% clear about the consequences of what we did, the effect for the other person. And we have to own the feelings of shame and guilt that we're going to have when we take steps 1 and 2. Okay. Until these things happen, you are not able to seek forgiveness properly. Now, what is it when I say to someone, I did this and I hurt you, what is it that I'm seeking from the other person? And this took me a really, really long time in my own life to figure out. And I really only figured it out because I was really, really angry at someone for a long time, and I had a lot of trouble getting past it, and finally I was able to forgive that person. And what I came to realize was that what it means is what I'm seeking from the other person and what the other person can grant me is my humanity. When I'm asking you to forgive me, I'm asking you to understand that I'm just flesh and blood. I'm not the thing that I did. I'm a person apart from the thing that I did. And what I did may be a terrible thing, but it doesn't define me. And what I'm asking you to do is not to see me as a monster, not to see me as apart from the human race, and to be able to say that you're human. And what you did, I could have done as well. That's what I'm seeking, I think. What I cannot demand when I seek forgiveness is reconciliation. We hope for that. And sometimes it's possible at this level, and sometimes it's available at this level, and sometimes it's not available at all. But I can't demand that. If I betray you, I can ask you to believe that I'm not simply a betrayer, I'm a person who betrayed. But I can't demand of you that the relationship go back to what it was. We hope that that will happen, but that takes a lot of work, and that's not included in the forgiveness package. That's a different package, except when we're talking about God, and we'll get to that. So let's look at the process of seeking forgiveness itself. Oh yeah, sorry, we left out one thing from the vidui that we have to emphasize, which has to do with the last thing that I said. So the last part is that the Rambam says a person has to say, forever will I not relapse into this thing again. Okay. Unless I can believe that you are committing yourself to not doing this thing to me again, I can't really forgive you. And unless you are making that commitment, you're not truly seeking forgiveness. Because the only way that I know that you understand how wrong what you did is you understand that you can never do it again. If I don't get that from you, and if I don't feel that from you, then there is no possibility for forgiveness. Let's take a look at the next page, Laws of Repentance, chapter 2, Halakha 9. Okay. So here the Rambam says Tshuva and Yom Kippur only for sins between man and God. For example, a person who ate a forbidden food or engaged in forbidden sexual relations and the like. However, interpersonal sins, for example, someone who injures a colleague, curses a colleague, steals from a colleague or the like, will never be forgiven unless that person gives the colleague what is owed and appeases the person. Okay. So here, the Rambam is saying two important things. That to obtain forgiveness, I have to do two things, right? One is, to the extent that I can right the wrong, I have to right it. So, like if I stole money from you, I have to return the money to you. But returning the money does not solve the problem. It doesn't solve the problem because, as we said before, there's the action, and then there are the consequences of the action for that person. And when one of the things that is true when I sin against you is that I diminish you. Or I certainly make you feel diminished as a human being. After all, if I really cared about you as a human being, if I fully respected you as a human being, how could I do that to you? So it suggests that in my eyes, you are less than who I am and what I am. You are less valuable. And therefore, I can take something from you. I can take advantage of you. So in the process of seeking forgiveness, I have to indicate that I re-elevate you. I acknowledge that I diminished you, and now I want to let you know that I value you as a human being. And that's what appeasing the person means. Now, there's a very important rule about appeasement. Take a look at page 3, source number 4. And it's important to mention this because this is a problem that comes up all the time with forgiveness. Okay, I think after this, I see there are like many questions here. So I think I'm going to finish this part, and then maybe people will, if we can take some questions. So if you look at source number 4 from Pirkei Avot, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Al tiratzeh et chavercha b'sha'at ka'aso. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, do not try to appease your friend at the hour of anger. Why do I ask you to forgive me? Well, one of the reasons I ask you to forgive me is that I feel bad. And I don't want to feel bad. And for me to feel good again, I need you to forgive me. And I want that to happen as quickly as possible. That's normal, right? If I feel bad, I want to feel good as quickly as I can. And because of that, sometimes, too often, my timing is off. You know, I hurt you. I say something totally insensitive. I mean, if there are any spouses out there, then we're all familiar with the situation. So I say something insensitive to my spouse, and the minute it comes out of my mouth, I realize that was bad. I shouldn't have said that. And I say, I'm sorry. That's not the real apology. Because that's what Rav Shimon ben Elazar is saying. Al tiratzeh adam b'shat kaso. If I expect someone to forgive me in the moment that I trespass against them, I'm minimizing their right to their anger and their pain. And I'm saying to them, in effect, listen, I said I'm sorry, and I want to be forgiven. Now, 2 seconds ago, I said something hurtful. Now I said I'm sorry. Forgive me. We should be good now, right? So it doesn't work that way. If I have that expectation, and that's the sum total of my apology and my seeking forgiveness, then that, again, is not respecting, and it is diminishing that person's personhood and their right to be angry and feel hurt. So the real apology and the real forgiveness can only come later. It might be 2 apologies. It might be 3 apologies. And sometimes, apropos of what we said earlier, it might be, I realize that I keep doing the same thing over and over again. And that's not good. And it's not going to get solved by my constantly doing it and then saying, I'm sorry. As we used to say to our son, Matan, sometimes. In this case, sorry is not enough. Sometimes sorry is not enough. Sometimes the road to forgiveness is to sit down and say, you see that this keeps happening. Why does it keep happening? How can we stop it? How can I stop it? Right? And it's only if I'm willing to do this, and I'm willing to look at how it could be different in the future, that's really Kabbalah al-Ha'atit. That's accepting for the future that things are going to be different. And that's how forgiveness can take place. So let's take some questions, shall we?
I just want to remind everyone we're using not the chat for questions, but the raise hand feature in Zoom. So
yeah, okay. There's a lot of stuff in the chat, I think.
Yeah, we don't expect the faculty to lecture brilliantly and also read everything in the chat at the same time. So if you have a question, please go ahead and click your hand icon, and then Connie can call on you.
Okay, George.
I'm thinking in terms of Simon Wiesenthal's novel, The Sunflower. Are there some actions between human beings, you could generically say man to man, that are unforgivable? In the novel, if I remember, the mortally wounded Nazi, perhaps SS officer, seeks the forgiveness of the Jewish medic who is taking care of him, and perhaps goes through all of these steps you've just enumerated. Are there things between human beings that are just totally unforgivable?
So I think the best remark here is the one by C.S. Lewis. I quote part of his essay on forgiveness in the source sheet. C.S. Lewis was a brilliant Christian theologian and author. And in part of that essay, he says, if we're going to talk about forgiveness, let's not start with the Gestapo. In other words, your question is a very legitimate question. And it may be that there are people who cannot be forgiven, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But what I sort of want to head off on at the pass is that there may be a group of people where it's really, really difficult. It's a difficult question. Are these people really forgivable? But I hope we can agree that that group of people is really, really small. Because one of the things that we have to realize is that we all need to be forgiven. We all need forgiveness. We all sin. We all hurt other people. So when I'm considering whether to forgive someone else, one of the things that I always do is, I try to do, is to say, could I have done that? Have I ever done that? Have I ever? Yeah, I understand you're shaking your head for the Gestapo. But short of that, okay? what is the range of people? At what point can I honestly say, I could never imagine myself doing that? If I can say, I can never imagine myself doing that, then that's a very special category. Then that's the SS category. And I'll come back to it in a second. But what C.S. Lewis is saying is really important is that we have to be careful when we are contemplating whether or not to forgive somebody, whether we are being honest about who we are and what we have done and what we are capable of doing. And are we able to see that we may not have done what that person did, but we did something like what that person did. And if we didn't do something like what that person did, perhaps we could have. It's not unimaginable to us that we did it. Let's see what page it is. On page, on page 5 of the sources, there's a story that is a fairly famous one, which is about a Gentile who goes to Shammai and says at the top of the page, verse 8, convert me on the condition that they teach me the entire Torah when I am standing on one foot. Shammai pushed him away with the builder's cubit in his hand. Gentile came before Hillel. Hillel converted him and said, that which is hateful to you, do not do to another. That is the entire Torah. And the rest is its interpretation. Go study. So this applies to forgiveness as well. So when somebody is asking my forgiveness, I have to remember that we all need forgiveness. So one of the questions I have to be asking myself is, am I extending myself to this person in an effort to forgive this person to the same degree that I want other people to extend themselves to me to forgive me? If not, then I am falling short on the commandment of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love your fellow human being as yourself. Now, to return to the Gestapo officer or the SS officer, that whole case is a very complicated case. The officer is asking Wiesenthal to forgive him for something that he didn't do to Wiesenthal personally. It's very complicated. But here's what I would say. I believe that I am ready to say, and I feel that I need to be able to say, that before God, any person can turn to God and say, God, and engage in that act of vidui and say, in effect, maybe the people to whom I did what I did, maybe they can never forgive me. And I can understand that. But I ask you to accept my sincere repentance. And I ask you to forgive me, by which I mean, God, that you accept me as a person who is capable of turning away from sin. That every human being, in God's eyes, is capable of turning away from sin. And this is the great difference, I think, between God and human beings. We cannot erase the past. When we forgive people, we do not forget. And that's as it should be. Nobody should expect us to forget. Now, what we do with the fact that we don't forget, we'll come back to in a second. But we don't forget. God can not forget, but treat us as though we are a new person. Let's see here. If you take a look at page, do we have it in here? No, okay, I didn't think, yeah. On page 7, source 18. It's actually, I think, the last source. Rambam Maimonides says as follows. Great indeed is repentance, for it brings us close to the Shekhinah, even as it is said, return, O Israel, unto the Lord thy God. Shuva Yisrael ad Hashem Elokecha. And it is further said, you have not returned unto me, says God. And it is said again, if you will return, says God, return to me. As if saying, if you will turn in repentance, you will cleave to me, you will be connected to me. Repentance brings near the far apart. But yesterday the sinner was hateful to the presence of God, scorned, ostracized, and abominate, and today, beloved, desirable, companionable, and a friend. The idea here is that when we engage in tshuva, as far as God is concerned, we begin again. We return to God. We're in this intimate relationship with God. And God can wipe away sin. We as human beings cannot do that. God can wipe them away. So one can say of any human being, I cannot speak for what happens between that person and God. That I leave to God and that human being. That much I will say. Now I also want to say, it's true that we can't forget, but there's a very important teaching in the Torah, and this is on page 5, source number 10. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. Lo tikon v'lo titor et b'nei amecha, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, ani Adonai. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself. I am Hashem. So the rabbis explain what's the difference between lo tikon and lo titor, taking vengeance or bearing a grudge. So lo tikon is, I come to you and I say, can I borrow your lawnmower? And you say, no, you can't. And the following year, your lawnmower breaks, and now I have a lawnmower. And you come to me and you say, can I borrow your lawnmower? And I say, no, you didn't lend me your lawnmower. I'm not lending you my lawnmower. Okay, that's lo tikon. Lo titor. Lo titor begins the same way. I say, lend me your lawnmower. You say, no, I'm not going to do it. Next year, your lawnmower breaks. I have a lawnmower. You come and you say, will you lend me your lawnmower? And I say, sure, I'll lend you my lawnmower. Because I'm not like you. See, last year, I wanted to borrow a lawnmower from you, but you wouldn't lend me your lawnmower. But I'm not like that. No. I'm a good person. Somebody comes, wants to borrow something, I lend it to them, even when they've been nasty to me. That's lo titor, which basically means to bear a grudge, to hang on to something. So here's the tricky part about forgiving people. When we forgive, that means we accept that person's humanity, we put into perspective the particular wrong that they did. And one of the ways that we put it into perspective and we prevent it from being foregrounded is we never bring it up again. We never mention it again. It's done. You did something bad. You did something bad to me. You hurt me. You acknowledged that you had done that. You asked for my forgiveness. I gave you my forgiveness, which means that I said to you, I was hurt. I appreciate that you are reaching out to me. And I understand that what you did was something that human beings unfortunately do. And I understand and I accept that your plan is not to do that again. And now we're not going to talk about this ever again. Okay? I'm not going to, in Yiddish, they have something that's called a faribel. Faribel is when somebody says to somebody else, remember 18 years ago when you didn't show up that time and I was waiting for you for hours and you didn't call, I never think about it anymore. That's a faribel, okay? And that's lo titor. So we both know it happened. And we don't deny that it happened. And by the way, for the sinner, we are told it is important never to forget that it happened. For I, the one who did it, need to remember that if I'm not careful, I could do it again. So I have to be very conscious of it. I need to know that I did it. But the other party, if the other party is really accepting my apology and is really forgiving, what this person is saying to me is, I accept your humanity. I see what you did in the context of your larger identity as a good human being. And I trust that you want to change and that you are capable of change. That's all included in forgiving someone. Now, again, we have to emphasize that just because I forgive someone does not mean that they are entitled for everything to be restored to what it was. We hope for that. Again, the only being with whom we can have that is with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. With God, by definition, Tshuva means our relationship with God is what it once was. With fellow human beings, it's a negotiation. Sometimes, if it's between two members of a couple, there's total reconciliation. Sometimes there's partial reconciliation. Sometimes, if it's with a friend who hurt me, I said, I don't really think we can continue to be friends, but I do forgive you. And by that I mean, I know that it happens. I know that people do things. I've done things like what you did, and I believe that you're sorry. I also believe that it was so painful that, at least for now, we need to stay distant from each other. There's no contradiction between those two things. That's also forgiveness. Other questions?
Suzanne?
Yep.
Okay. What if the person who is angry with you is angry at something that you did not do? And as many times as you've tried to explain and discuss why it's inaccurate for the person to think you did that, they refuse to listen. What do you do in that situation?
I'm not asking you to be personal, but it'd be helpful if you could give a more specific example, because it's hard for me to get exactly what you mean.
Okay. So I have an adopted daughter, and when she made contact with her birth parents, they told her that through some lawyer, I adopted her against her parents' will, which is not true. I was never told that. The information I was given was totally different. I also, if I helped her to find these birth parents. If that was the case, I never would have helped her. And this has happened many years ago. I have made more attempts to contact her and try to discuss this and even ask for forgiveness if in some way this happened with my not knowing it, but it's the truth. I can go on and on how many times and in various different ways that I've tried to do this. And she's totally broken off all relationships with anybody, including her siblings, her cousins, friends that she had, before this date. So for 35 years, basically, she had one life, and since that time, she has a totally other life. What does one do? Every Yom Kippur, I used to stand in front of the ark and pray to God to give me wisdom, to help me know how I can communicate. And finally, after about 12 or 13 years, I decided to stop asking God, because I decided there's no way that God is going to be able to help me. If he didn't help me up to now, he just couldn't be involved or whatever. I believe.
Okay, I'm gonna stop, because one of the reasons I'm gonna stop is I can't solve my own life problems, so I'm certainly not gonna try to solve yours.
Yes.
That's a really tough one. The one thing that I will say, which I think is really important in the forgiveness process, and what you just raised is a good segue into something that I wanted to say, is our ability to let go and accept that which is not within our power.
Yes.
That's a lot of the time, that's the power we have. The power we have is the power to accept that we are powerless.
Okay.
Not what we were looking for,
right,
but it's a way of claiming power, the power to accept and to walk away. And I'm going to use your comments as an opportunity to talk about something that I alluded to at the beginning. Whereas in Christian sources, there's a lot of talk about forgiving someone up front without that person asking for forgiveness. I would say that forgiving and being forgiven is thought of in relational terms in Jewish sources.
Right.
But I think that there is something that is true, which is I have the right to forgive someone who has not sought my forgiveness, and that it can be a meaningful act. How, you ask? If by forgiveness we mean, as I have said to you, I accept that this person is just flesh and blood, essentially a good person, who did something wrong, maybe something very wrong, maybe something, and maybe this person hurt me very much. Maybe this person doesn't see that. Maybe this person doesn't want to see that. But you know what? That's their problem. My problem is that I want to go past this hurt. And the way that I'm going to do it is by, paradoxically, by forgiving this person and by humanizing this person. Because here's the thing. When I forgive you, I humanize you, which means I make you both more and less than you were before. I make you more because before I forgave you, I was treating you like some kind of subhuman. You're a monster. You're not really a mensch. But also very often, before we forgive someone, we are giving that person an incredible amount of power in our lives. They're with us all the time. And by the way, I mean, this is not a halakha, this is psychology, and I'm practicing a little bit without a license here, but still, there is what we call an infiltrated consciousness. When someone has hurt me, I carry it with me, and in a certain sense, I view myself through that hurt. In some sense, I internalize it. So when I forgive someone, even someone who has not sought my forgiveness, I'm saying, you know what? In the end, they're flesh and blood. They're a human being, and like me, they did something very wrong. It would have been good if they had acknowledged it, but they didn't. And now I'm going to let go of that, and I'm going to move on. That's my forgiveness. And sometimes that can bring a real healing. Another question.
thank you.
Thank you.
Lori Spear.
Lori?
I think my question is related to both previous questions. In the shooting in South Carolina in a black church, the congregants forgave the shooter, though he hadn't asked for forgiveness and didn't admit that he had done anything wrong. And I was both amazed by their willingness to do this and kind of appalled by it as being something not Jewish, very alien. I found it very difficult to wrap my head around it. And I was just interested in your commenting.
Once again, as with George's question, we have to hear questions and think about subjects contextually. And I'm just going to say that if you're like me, you are inherently, what is C.S. Lewis's comments? He says, everyone thinks that forgiveness is a great thing till you have to do it. If you're anything like me, you don't run to forgive people when they hurt you. Maybe you're a better person than I am, but that's me. I do not run to forgive other people because it's hard and I'm angry. So do I have problems with that particular move that those people made? Yeah, and I'll talk about what I think an issue there is in a moment. But I just want us to be sure to see, once again, that generally speaking, the people that we have to forgive in our lives are not murderers. They're like people, like us. And sometimes they did really, really terrible things. But so have we. Well, I'll speak for myself. So have I. So I just want to be sure that that doesn't become the doorway into moving away from the fact that forgiving is something that we are, at least in some cases, obligated to do. So let me say two things. First of all, I want to make sure that we all know that halakha says that we are obligated. If you look on page 2 of the sources, and you look at the second to the last paragraph on page 2, even if a person only upset a colleague by saying certain things, one must appease that person and approach that person repeatedly until the person forgives him. So words hurt. So even words, saying words that hurt, are a reason that I have to seek forgiveness. If a colleague does not desire to forgive, then one should bring a group of 3 friends and approach with them and request forgiveness. If the wrong party is not appeased, should repeat the process a second and a third time. And by the way, there's a sort of what the rabbis called midah keneged midah, measure for measure here. I diminish that person in hurting that person. I have to be ready to diminish myself in seeking forgiveness. If I have to go several times, I have to go several times. If I have to bring friends with me and therefore have to admit to them that I did something terrible, so be it. But now, Rambam concludes, my mind concludes. If the party after the second, third time still does not want to forgive, I may let that person alone and I need not pursue the matter further. On the contrary, the person who refuses to grant forgiveness is the one considered as the sinner. Failing to forgive someone who in good faith has sought forgiveness is a sin. And I would characterize it as injustice. It is unjust to not to forgive a person who has sought forgiveness, because we all need forgiveness. The world could not exist without compassion. The world could not exist without forgiveness. So to pretend that forgiveness should be available only to certain people is unjust. And that, I think, is what the Rambam is saying. And to come back to the case of the shooting, so and actually this is related to what I just said. The idea of forgiving and forgiveness, I would say, in a Jewish context, is connected to the notion of justice. And that means that one of the reasons I have to forgive is because it's just. And one of the reasons that I have to seek forgiveness is because of justice. It is just that when I hurt you, that when I hurt another human being in whatever way, I should seek their forgiveness. So if the other party, if the offender is not seeking forgiveness, where does that leave me? So I was thinking about that. I'm reading, by the way, where's the book now? There's a great book called The Art of Forgiving by Louis B. Smeds, S-M-E-D-E-S, who was a Reformed a Christian clergyman, a Reformed church, where you'll find a lot of what he talks about. And he didn't quite say this, but he made me think about it. What I would say is, in a case like the shooting in the church, I could never imagine myself saying to the shooter, I forgive you. What I could imagine is saying to myself, I forgive you. In other words, to me, for the sinner to be entitled to hear from me a statement of forgiveness, there has to be an act of vidui on the part of that sinner. And absent that, that person is not entitled to that statement. But even if that person doesn't seek forgiveness from me personally, I have the option to say, in my heart, I forgive this person. But again, by which I mean, I accept their humanity. I accept that they are flesh and blood, did a terrible thing. And I will not demonize them because of that. I will say they have sinned terribly. They are human beings who have sinned terribly. That is something I could imagine happening. And I would say, Jewishly, I could imagine as an acceptable way of forgiving that person. But if you want the words from my mouth, then I have to hear the words from your mouth, because it's relational. Somebody wanted to ask about the book. Again, it's The Art of Forgiving by Louis B. Smeds. If that's the correct pronunciation, I have no idea. S-M-E-D-E-S, Louis Smeds. His family were blacksmiths in Holland. So that's Smeds. Another question.
Kevin Friedman.
Hi, Rabbi Diamond.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Rabbi Friedman.
So my question is, can you help with a source? It's sort of along what you just were saying, the idea of trying to forgive when the person doesn't think they did anything wrong, or doesn't say sorry.
What is the source for it? Is that your question?
Yeah, or if you could expand a little bit on that.
Let's come at it from a different angle. What am I looking for? In other words, What am I looking for when I'm seeking forgiveness? And what am I looking for when I'm forgiving? So let's think about the second question. What am I looking for when I forgive someone? What am I looking to do? So you could say, well, I'm looking to, at one level, I'm looking to do what God wants me to do, to be compassionate. Okay. If that's what I'm looking to do, if that's one of the things that I'm looking to do, and I am imitating God, right? Mahu Rahum Afatarahum, just as God is gracious and merciful, so too you shall be gracious and merciful. Then what is appropriate in a case where someone has wronged me, but has not sought forgiveness? How should I see that person? Forgiveness is a certain way of seeing people. And it's a way of seeing people that is a compassionate way of seeing people. Way of seeing a person that says the wrong that the person did does not erase their humanity or their goodness. Okay. And if I'm not able to do that, then I'm misrepresenting that person. Because if I insist, if you wrong me and you don't ask my forgiveness, and I hold on to it, and I say, and what does it mean? What am I holding on to? I'm holding on to anger, and I'm holding on to hatred. That's the opposite of forgiving you, right? It's hating you and being angry at you. So if I'm holding on to that, it means I cannot see you simply as a person who has done something wrong. I see you as your sin. And when I do that, I'm misrepresenting you and I'm being unfair to you. I've said many times, this is the great sin of Leshon Hara, right? Leshon Hara is to spread gossip, true gossip. Say things that are absolutely true about someone else, 100% accurate, verifiable, and I said about something that you did or you didn't do, and I say it, that is a sin. And what is the sin of Lashon Hara? And one of the sins of Lashon Hara is it's using something that's true in the service of a lie. Because when I describe to someone else what you have done, and I highlight something wrong that you have done, I'm distorting your picture of that human being. Now in your mind, you think of that human being as the person who did blah, blah, blah. That's who that person is, you know. I'm just going to say it. I encountered someone today about whom I heard bad things. And it was a real effort for me to just encounter that person as a fellow human being. Because in my mind it was, oh, that's the person about whom I heard blah, blah, blah. And I know that this person is a good person. They may have done something wrong. Probably they did do something wrong. Well, they did something wrong. But they're a human being, like me. Guess what? I do things that are wrong too. So to forgive a person who hasn't sought forgiveness is simply to say, I accept the humanity of this person, and I can let go of my hatred and my anger. And this is a good moment to say, and this is really, really important, that forgiveness is not excusing. When I forgive you, I do not excuse you. And on the other hand, when people apologize, they may not excuse themselves, like, this isn't the real me. This isn't who I really am. Yeah, I said that, but that's not who I really am. Well, actually, it is who you really are because you said it. So it's a part of who you are. And I'm not expected to say about the other person, it's okay that you did what you did. That is not forgiving. Forgiving is saying, what you did is not okay, but I can go on with you, accepting you as a human being, given that you did something that was not okay. Forgiving is not excusing. That is really, really crucial for both the person seeking forgiveness and the person who is forgiving. Another question?
Rabbi Donnie, we have just about seven or so minutes left. I didn't know if you wanted to, if there's any more material you wanted to cover from the sheet, or other things you wanted to address aside from responding to questions.
Okay. No, let's take more questions, and I'll use them as an opportunity to sum up.
Great.
Jody Harburger.
Jody?
Yes, my question has to do with the classification of marital infidelity. Is it a sin between man and God, or a sin between humans, or both?
Marital infidelity, was that your comment?
Yes.
So every sin is a sin between human beings and God, because we are all God's children. So if you sin against God directly, you've sinned against God. If you sin against one of God's children, well, you've also sinned against God, because God cares about God's children. So marital infidelity is obviously both, right? It's the marriage is called a brit, a covenant. So I have betrayed a covenant that I have with a fellow human being. And yes, I've hurt God as well. So yeah, it's both. It's both. Another question?
Leonard Groupman.
Thank you. I was wondering whether the rabbis discuss at all the question of someone who won't forgive himself. So you spoke about that the sinner, let's say someone hurt someone else, asks for forgiveness from that person, is granted forgiveness. You said the sinner, it's important that the sinner never forget what he did. But what if there's a way in which he can't forgive himself? Is that a way of not acknowledging or accepting his humanity and claiming something more, of being something other than human? Does it put him in the position of the sinner in the Maimonides quote, that who refuses to grant forgiveness, in this case to himself? Is that issue ever addressed? And maybe it's more an issue, a matter of guilt than of something about forgiveness. So my question is, do the rabbis address the question of a person who can't forgive himself?
I can't think of a specific source that does, but I certainly can say that the whole weight of tradition is to see ourselves as eminently forgivable. The whole, Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the 10 days of repentance, the mitzvah, sometimes there's a very subtle thing that goes on. It's like what you choose to emphasize or de-emphasize. We can see this period of the 10 days of repentance and Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur as an extremely harsh and punitive period. It is a time when the message is, you sinners, you shirkers, you just constantly are failing me, God is saying, constantly disappointing me. constantly betraying each other. And no matter how hard you try, you do it again and again and again. And what I want you to do is go into shul and feel terrible and just be painfully aware of just how inadequate you human beings are. That's what I want. And I will not say that there is none of that. And I think it is important to be painfully aware of just how flawed we are. But there's a very different way to see it, and it's the way that I invite all of us to see it, and I believe it's the way we're meant to see it, which is God is reaching out and saying, I created this time as a time for you to restore yourselves to yourselves, to restore yourselves to me, to restore yourselves to each other. And that's why I've created tshuva. That's why I've created the possibility of return, of repentance. And that's why I've created forgiveness. And a person who says, my sins are too terrible, I can't forgive myself, I would say that's actually arrogant. Guess what? You sin, you want to see sins, I'll show you sins. Okay? We all have sin. And we all are obligated to seek forgiveness and to grant forgiveness. And what does it mean to forgive myself? What it means to forgive myself is to accept my humanity. Louis Newman, in his book Repentance, says that in the act of vidui, in the act of repentance, I say two things. I am flawed, and I am the human being that God made me. Those are both true. So it is a call to accept my shortcomings, and it is a call to accept myself as a human being, and if you want to use the phrase, to forgive myself. So I know we're almost out of time. So let me just very briefly say that I think forgiveness is one of the least understood words in all of our vocabulary. And it's one of the most difficult things to do and to do well. And I think what lies at the heart of it is to be honest and to be compassionate. So for the person seeking forgiveness, we have to be totally honest about what we have done. And we have to be able to use our radical empathy to understand how what we have done must have affected the person we have hurt. And when we are the ones who are forgiving, we have to be the person who has a deep, radical empathy with the other person as a fellow human being. It's a person who hurts not because that person is a demon, but because that person is a human being. And particularly if that person comes before me and says, help me make myself whole again by granting me your forgiveness, which means I accept that you are a good person who did something bad. And I accept that you intend not to do it again. When those two things happen, that deep honesty and radical empathy on the part of the person seeking forgiveness, and the deep compassion and the radical empathy on the part of the person who is granting forgiveness, when those two things happen, then tshuva takes place, and then mechila, forgiveness, takes place. And then there is the true possibility for reconciliation among fellow human beings and between human beings and God.
Rabbi Diamond, thank you so much for teaching us today. I think, friends, I hope you can see why Rabbi Diamond is such a treasure for rabbinical students, such a mentor and a guide. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. I hope you found this valuable. I think you're right, Rabbi Diamond, that it's one of the hardest things to do, and you've really given us a framework for thinking about it, and actually tools, not only Jewish wisdom, but really some tools. The lawn guys are right here outside my window. I apologize for that noise. I want to make sure everyone knows about next week's session with Professor Ben Summer, which is called From Self-Interest to Self-Surrender, Confronting the Challenges of Prayer. And we will then pause for Labor Day, and then our final session will be taught by me on September 14th. We'll tell you more about that going forward. Rabbi Diamond, I don't know if you have the flexibility to stay and answer additional questions today or not.
Yeah, I do. If people have questions, I will.
Thank you so much. So we'll bring it to a formal close, but everyone needs to leave. But continue with a few more minutes of questions. Thank you, Rabbi Diamond. Thanks, Tani, for your facilitation, and we'll see you all soon.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Rabbi Diamond. I'm going to call on Carrie Hansen.
No?
Okay. Oh.
Okay. Thank you. My question is, back in the beginning, and we had a kind of a discussion in chat during this, when is it appropriate to publicly out someone? For example, someone who is abused in the church, and this person is still in a position where they can abuse others. Isn't that appropriate to bring it to the attention of other people to protect the congregation? Is that not, that's not sin, that's not spreading gossip to hurt people, that is trying to protect people.
So, yes, it may well be appropriate. And the thing in situations like this is, and these are very intertwined. What is our goal? Which means in part, what is the justification for doing what we're doing? And B, which is very connected, how do we do what we do? So it seems to me that in that situation, the goal is, how do we stop this person from hurting other people? How do we stop this person from continuing to hurt people, A? And B, how do we bring this person to justice for the hurt that the person has already caused? Certainly A. B, maybe theology will enter into it here, I don't know. But I think, it's very important to understand that if someone attacks me and injures me, and I forgive that person, that does not equal, and therefore I am obligated to go to the police and drop the charges. Those are two different things, okay? Forgiving means I understand you're not a monster. I believe that you're sincerely sorry for what you did. And I believe that you're making commitment not to do it again. Meanwhile, you did it. And there are consequences. So those can remain. So coming back to your case. So A, I need to know my goals. Once I know my goals, then that has to affect how I do what I do. Let me give you an example. There's a famous Rabbi Israel Meir HaKohen, who wrote a book called Chafetz Chaim, Those Who Desire Life, where he talks about the issue of gossip. So he says, what about the following case? You know that your friend is planning to hire someone as the CFO of their company. And you know that this person was accused of embezzling And though the person was never convicted, they were fired from their position at another company. And you know that this person doesn't know that. So what do you do?
Nothing.
No. Well, okay.
I'm not obligated. I mean, maybe he's changed.
Well, so here's what the Chavetz Chaim says. Here's what the Chavetz Chaim says. He says, you say to your friend, here is the information that I have. I do not know for sure that this person did that, but they were accused of it and they were fired. I don't say this person is an embezzler, but I also don't say nothing because I need to protect my friend who doesn't have information that that person should have. The point that the Chavetz Chaim is making is describe, do not characterize. Okay? So in the case that you're discussing, you might need to share information about what a person did.
Mm-hmm.
You would not characterize the person. You would not say, so-and-so is a fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Okay. And the point here, and this is what is important, is I always have to, when I say things like this, as good as what the cause may be, I am hurting someone. I am hurting the sinner.
Mm-hmm.
There may be a very important reason to do it, and I'm doing it. So I always need to have before me what is the goal and what is justified by that goal and what is not justified by that goal. That's what I would say is the key. Okay.
Okay.
Another question?
Sherry Allen.
Hi, Rabbi Diamond. Two things. You can choose which one you want to answer, or answer both. But first thing is, I hear that theme of, to forgive someone even if they haven't asked for forgiveness, is you acknowledging that their humanity, that you trust that they just did a bad thing and they were a good, maybe they're a good person, and hopefully won't do it again. But if they don't acknowledge, or what if you brought to their attention, you did this thing, it really hurt me, let's talk about that, and they refuse to say I'm sorry, they refuse, and that they haven't heard you, that they're in denial, that they will do it again, then what? Okay, so that's the first question. Second question is, how does this all figure in, with this whole, the death penalty? I mean, the death penalty is in the Torah, right? I mean, stoning people. But truly, if the Torah also teaches us that we are supposed to acknowledge people's humanity, and give them credit for that, and acknowledge that there might be a chance for them to reform or change, then shouldn't it be a Jewish value to be against the death penalty? I don't know. So those are my two questions. Take it back.
Well, okay. Risk of stating the obvious. The second question is a lecture unto itself. Maybe I'll say something about it, but it's a much broader discussion. With regard to your first question, see, again, and I have to be careful here of not sinning against you or anyone else in any of the answers that I'm giving here, but if your point is that that you've tried to get the person to hear what they've done is wrong, and they haven't heard it, and you think they're going to do it again, right? So now let's stop right there. So now what is your goal? Okay, so all of that's true. Now what's your goal at that moment? You can't hear me? You're muted. You're muted.
I guess, you know, if I feel that I've made the point and that nothing I will say will ever change the situation or change that person,
Right.
I think my goal would be if I continue to have a relationship with this person, it's going to be a toxic situation for me, and to protect myself, I am just going to disengage. I mean, I guess that would be my, you know,
Okay.
and not continue to fester, you know.
Right. Are you allowed to continue to be angry at this person and feel hatred towards that person? I guess. But that and how much is the subway now? It's been a while. $2.75 at this point? I forgot. Right? Then $2.75 will get you on the subway. So you could do it. I mean, what I keep coming back to is, and maybe I'm just talking to myself, but I don't think I am. There is an inherent, for many people, there's an inherent reluctance to forgive. There is a sense that it's not fair. The person hurt me. There should be a price to be paid. But what I think is true is it will never be totally fair. Sin isn't fair. People hurting each other isn't fair. And we're not going to make it fair. So we have to accept that. And now we're moving into the realm of compassion. Now, again, I emphasize again, forgiveness is not excusing. So we're not inviting what the rabbis called chotei niskar, the sinner being rewarded. But we are encouraging a letting go. So, but if someone would ask me, for example, about this person who hurt you in a certain way, and you spoke to that person and they didn't hear it, and you think they're going to continue doing it, if someone said to you, you know, I just met this person, I'm thinking of becoming friends. What do you think? I think, and for me, I would have to do it really, really carefully. I would either say, you know, I'm the wrong person to ask, or I would say, I had some difficult experiences. And I might do the latter to help that other person, my friend, in that spirit. Although internally, I know the real thing I would want to do is I would want to say, that person is, I won't say the rest of it. Okay. And these are hard things to do, but they are, I think, the right things to do. Another question.
Julia Pays.
Yes, Rabbi. I was wondering about someone who asked me to forgive them, and I didn't forgive them, but subsequently they died. And I feel really bad about not forgiving them when they were alive. And
well, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, please.
Okay. So, Rambam actually talks about this. The Talmud talks about this. He talks about taking 10 people to that person's grave and asking for that person's forgiveness. And I think the idea of taking 10 people to the grave is to say, as I think somebody just said in the comments, saying it out loud. Okay. So I actually once did something like that at a rabbinic retreat. Anyway, but I also want to make another suggestion to you. One of the ways that you can make a tikkun, a repair of not having forgiven that person, is to take it upon yourself now to go out of your way to forgive people to the best of your ability. Can't change the past, but we can change the future. So if you learn from that experience that when you don't forgive a person, when you have the chance to forgive that person, you might be losing that opportunity forever. If you learn that and you apply that lesson to your life now, and when people hurt you you forgive them sooner rather than later, if you can. I mean, there's no, although, one of the sources I quoted was, what happens if someone asks for my forgiveness and I want to do it and I'm ready to say the words, but I don't really feel it. So there's a Rabbi Engel who quotes the rabbinic saying, Dvarim shebalev einam dvarim. Words that are in the heart are not words. In other words, what you say is more crucial than what you feel. The idea being, if you say the right words, even if you don't mean them, you took the step in the right direction. And hopefully saying the words will bring your feelings along eventually. But in any case, I would think that's the best tikkun. I once hurt somebody very badly. And I wrote this person a letter and I said, first thing I said was, you don't have to respond to this letter. Not that they need me to tell them that. I know, so I'm not expecting it. Okay. And I said, I can't change what I did to you. It was terrible, and here's what I did. I said, I want you to know the following. In my life now, I work very, very hard to deal very differently with the kind of situation that you and I were in. And I'm in that situation now. I work very hard to deal with it very, very differently. That's the tikkun, that's the repair that I've been able to do. So maybe that's what you can do. And it's not unimportant. It's important. Another question?
Thank you.
Sure.
Sherry Miller.
Hi.
Sherry.
Long time no see. I've thought about the issue of forgiveness as well as asking for forgiveness. Usually in terms of asking, I try. I'm not saying I always do. I right away, I'll say at least the words, I'm sorry, because I usually am. But on the other issue of forgiving someone else, that's a harder thing to deal with, especially if that person has no idea of what they're doing. But I'll give you one example that I think really gets to the heart of it, and it calls for sometimes you can't say the words, but you can change your actions, which can affect the same thing. It happened in the neighborhood I live in. There was actually she was a homeless woman who would go around the neighborhood screaming at the top of her lungs. Once she knocked me down, I was very angry as a result of that. And I couldn't get it out of me. And so I remained angry for a long time. But then I don't know what made me think otherwise. But let's say the next time I saw her, instead of just saying, well, I forgive you or anything like that, I said, that's a beautiful scarf you're wearing. It was amazing what that affected on her and on me. Yeah. Because the first thing it did is all of a sudden my anger drained by acting in that way. It just released it completely. And as far as she was concerned, it's like, okay, I'm going to use the words. It's like, oh God, she's really being awfully nice to me. And you know what the end result was? She'd still go around the neighborhood screaming. But whenever we saw each other, it's like, hi, how are you? And then, she'd walk towards me, acknowledge each other, and do the hi, how are you? And then she went on. She continued screaming.
Okay, that's progress. But you said something really important that I want to emphasize, which is actions. Sure. Part of the way of Torah, basic to the way of Torah, is that our actions affect our feelings and our thoughts. Too often we wait to have the right feelings and the right thoughts before we act. It's a good idea a lot of times to act first. The feelings and the thoughts will follow. And I have experienced exactly what you described so many times, that when I encounter people that I have bad feelings towards, I make a special effort to speak nicely to them, to do something for them. And yes, it is transformative for me, also for them, but most importantly, for me, right? Feel differently about that person. You mentioned something that
Behavior modification.
behavior modification, absolutely. But the whole halachic life style, okay, if you want to use that phrase, the whole notion of halakha is that how we conduct ourselves molds who we are as human beings. And sometimes we do things with less than total conviction, often do things with less than total conviction, but the doing of those things molds who we are as human beings. And it's true of forgiving as well. So you alluded to something that I wanted to mention. This is on page 5 of the sources, source number 10. I'm sure you know this, Sherry. Lo tisna et achicha bilvavecha ucheach tochiach tamitecha v'lo tisa lavchei. You shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart. Reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him. Okay? People can't apologize for things when they don't know that they did something wrong. And even though it might seem incredible to us that a person could not know that what they did was really bad, sometimes people really don't know. Sometimes people know, but they're embarrassed. Sometimes people know, but they deny it to themselves. We owe it to them, the Torah says. We have an obligation, says the Torah, to educate them. I always translate as educate your kinsman. We have the obligation to say to someone, I want to help you. I want to help you engage in an act of tshuva. And I want to help you help me repair our relationship. And to do that, I'm going to tell you, here's what you did. And here's how it made me feel. Now, again, listen carefully to the last two things that I said, because these are themes that have come up before. On the one hand, I have to be scrupulously accurate about what a person did. In other words, they did X. And they didn't see it as a problem. And I have to be fair to them and say, that's what you did. Now I'm going to tell you, here's how I felt when you did it. And you don't get to tell me how I feel when you do it. Right? This is one of the worst things that we encounter sometimes. People say, well, you really shouldn't have felt bad. You really shouldn't have been insulted. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. I was insulted. Okay. You can say, I certainly didn't mean it that way. But you need to, as we say, validate my experience. You can walk away saying, God, that person's really touchy. Okay, you're entitled to think that. But you have to accept that that's the effect that it had for me. And you have to be able to say, had I known that that's the effect that it was going to have, I would have done it differently. I don't want to hurt you. Okay? And I'm not going to say, well, it's my right to say it the way I want to say it. I'm going to say, okay, I hear you.
Yeah.
But we have an obligation as people who are hurt. We have an obligation as people who are hurt to open the door to reconciliation. And when we see that the other person just doesn't get it, then we have the obligation of hocheach tochiach tamitecha, to let the other person know, to inform, not to scream our heads off, but to inform, to say, I need you to know the following. That's very important.
All right.
Another question.
I agree with you.
Good.
Rona Weber.
I feel a little nervous about asking this question. In the High Holiday Mussar, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. In the High Holiday Mussar, there's a portion where you say your sins, and then it says, and God says, I forgive you. And I've always thought, how do we know that? How do we know that we're forgiven? And does God forgive everything? I'm just curious.
I'm really glad that you said that. Of course, if you're asking for inside information, I don't have it.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that, well, this is a part of a much larger topic, and I'll just talk about it a little bit. It'd really be a great thing to talk about on another occasion. We are in a covenantal relationship with God, and both parties have responsibilities. We have a responsibility to seek forgiveness. God has an obligation to forgive us. God, I will say it again. God has an obligation to forgive us. God has told us that if we come in sincerity and we stand before God, seeking forgiveness, acknowledging our sins, feeling guilt and shame, not for some neurotic reason, but because that is a sign that we appreciate the gravity of what we've done. And we made a sincere commitment not to sin again, then God has promised and God has obligated God's self to forgive us. So I'm not there in heaven, but what I can say is that we are entitled, when we say God has forgiven us, what I am saying, to me, what we are saying is we are turning to God and say, and now, God, it is your turn. We have done what is incumbent upon us. You have an obligation to act with compassion and to forgive us. Because to do less, God, would be unjust. You cannot create flawed human beings who inevitably will sin, will fail, and then not forgive them when they do. Only an unjust God would do that. You tell us that you are a just God. So when we sin and when we repent, you forgive us because you must. We have done what we are supposed to do. You must do what you said you would do. That's the deal.
It's very comforting. Thank you.
Okay. We take one more for the road.
Okay, Meg?
Thank you. It was very moving to hear about the woman whose adopted daughter was now out of contact with her. I'm in a situation where my husband's adult son, 40-year-old, got angry with me. I never felt, I was never called stepmom because his mother is alive. It was just someone I had a good relationship with as well as his 3 children. And I did something which he felt disrespected him. And, he ended up cutting us off from his children.
Sorry to hear that.
And I just think it's very hard to, I made an attempt. I said in front of his children, I said to him, I never intended to disrespect you. That was not my intention. And he blew up and just, said, well, that's one lame apology if ever I heard one. Forget about it. And just kept wanting to, go on and on with the whole thing. He gave a very lame attempt 2 Yom Kippurs ago to say, I'll model how to apologize. And he said some little thing like, I'm sorry I gave you peanut butter instead of jelly. I don't remember. So when you have an impasse like that, where each of us feel like we deserve the apology, does it make sense to go ahead and say to him, I forgive you? Because I want to stop seeing him as a monster. I mean, my attitude toward him has just been so hindered by what he did in terms of his children. And that I can see that a lot of it doesn't have to do with me. It has to do with his relationship with his dad, which he's had for 40 years. He's only known me for a dozen, So it's a very hard situation. Any comments are helpful.
Well, whether they're helpful, you'll have to decide, but okay. I'll try to make them helpful. I'm going to say something that you probably don't want to hear, but you put it out there and you're asking me, so I'm going to tell you. When you said to this person, this is not what I intended, what isn't in there is but this is how you experienced it. We cannot, we can intend X, but another person can experience Y. So when I'm seeking someone's forgiveness, I need to accept that even though I intended something very positive, it might not have been experienced as positive. And so I'm not going to get that person's forgiveness until I'm able to say to that person, I understand that what I said was hurtful to you. Not because you intended it that way. You didn't intend it that way. But it was hurtful.
Oh, I said that. I said very clearly that he felt disrespected. He felt disrespected. I acknowledge that, and I said that that was not my intent.
Yeah, no, but, well, okay. I don't think you're hearing me. What I'm saying is, what he wants to hear, perhaps, is that wasn't my intent, and that's not how you heard it. And so I understand why for you it was hurtful. The fact that it's not my intent doesn't change the effect that the words have on the other person. And I have to grant the person that, whatever you want to call it, right or experience of being hurt. I don't know if you can repair it at this point. It may not be possible. But if I were to go back, I think that's what I would say. I would say, I hear. I told you it wasn't my intent, and it wasn't. But I hear that for you, that's not what's important. What's important is how you heard the words that I said and the effect that those words had upon you. And I'm sorry that those words had the effect that they had upon you. And I regret saying them. That's what I think he might be seeking. That's what a person in that situation might seek. So, I mean, you have to decide. You have to decide how important the relationship is. You also have to decide how much of a chance you want to take. These things are scary. It's really, really scary to seek forgiveness in many situations, especially, after a long time, because we don't get to decide the outcome. When I ask somebody's forgiveness, I can't say, now, before we start, I need a guarantee from you that you're going to forgive me. And we don't get that. And that's really, really, really scary. So I feel for you. I really, really do.
And can I just ask, in this process, if I do it over, I think what he is really expecting is a totally clear apology.
Right.
And that's what you're saying. To say, I am sorry that my words made you feel disrespected. That's not enough for him. He wants to hear, I am sorry I disrespected you. I don't think he will accept anything less.
Okay, here's another way to do this.
Thanks.
What do you want? What's your goal?
My goal?
And if, no, that was a rhetorical question.
Okay.
I have to answer. What do I want? So if what I want is to repair the relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I have to go into it saying, and sometimes you literally have to say this to the other person, please tell me what I need to do to make this right. My goal is to make this right. I want to restore the relationship between us. Tell me what, in your view, with what you're feeling, what do you need for me to do to make this right? I'll give you an example from something that happened to me. I was working with a rabbi in a certain context, and as far as I was concerned, this person was the rabbi from hell. Rabbi from hell. I could not deal with this person. It was just impossible. On the day before we were supposed to be, or actually the morning of the day that we were supposed to be functioning together at services, this person made a phone call that just, at a certain point, I'm hanging up because I can't take it anymore. And I did. And I got to shul. And it was time to start davening. And I was the chazan, and this person was the rabbi. And I said to myself, how can I officiate as the chazan, being angry at the rabbi? I can't do it. I can't do it. So I went over to the rabbi, and I said to the rabbi, I'm sorry. Now, I wasn't sorry. I mean, or let me be very precise. I was sorry that we were fighting. I was sorry that there was something between us. And I wanted it to be repaired. And the only way that I knew how to make that happen was to walk over to the rabbi and say, I'm sorry. And you know what? It worked. It worked for me. I didn't, you know, in other words, like I didn't spend the whole time during God thinking, why am I saying I'm sorry to this person? This person should be saying sorry to me. That son of a bitch. I didn't say that. Okay? I didn't even think it. Because I knew what I was doing. I was saying, this is real what we're doing together. We cannot do it as enemies. So somebody has to make it right. And if it's going to be me, then it's going to be me. And I'm going to do what I need to do to make it right. I said, I'm sorry. We never were great friends, by the way. But we got past that, and we functioned together. So that's the only, that's why I feel comfortable saying to you what I'm saying, because I've been there.
Good,
okay?
thank you. And I think that's an important distinction, that you just want to be able to function together. You know, we want to be able to function. We want to be able to still be with, you know, have, you know, his kids used to spend 2 weeks with us. You know, now we're not allowed to see them for 2 years.
One possibility is just to say, I want to make this right. I really do. I'm very sad. I'm sad. We used to be together and we're not. We're look at what we've lost. What a tragedy that we've lost it. I don't want it to be that way. I doubt that you do. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this relationship work. So you tell me, what is it? And if that's really, really, really what you want, whatever the guy has to say, so you'll say it. Whatever the guy says to say, you'll say it. You may agree with it, you may not agree with it so much, but you'll say it, and God willing, it'll be heard. And God willing, next year you will be together. That's my hope.
Thank you so much. And for all the teachings, for the beautiful packet of information, and for all the examples and all the time, the extra time you've taken now, an extra 45 minutes to answer people's very, very deep needs. I thank you so much.
I get time and a half after the first hour and a quarter, right?
Okay.
Oh, no?
Thank you, Rabbi Diamond.
Okay.
Rabbi Diamond, are you, I've really been thinking about something in response to Meg's point also. With your permission, can I chime in as well?
Yes, of course.
Just last week, I had an experience of asking for forgiveness and being forgiven. That was profound for me. It was not as weighty as what you're talking about. It was not with a family member, but I couldn't remember having an experience like this, and I learned a lot from it. So this was someone who I had unwittingly embarrassed on Facebook in a large local group, which, needless to say, if you knew me, was the furthest thing from my intention. I was raising an issue about COVID safety and social distancing, and she experienced it as my calling out her family and publicly shaming them. And I didn't know, and I don't actually know this person. She's just another person in a large local group. And then I met her in person, and she unleashed a torrent of pent up anger at me. This was a post 2 months ago. And she had been, I never met this person, and she had been so angry at me for 2 months, and felt that I caused like terrible humiliation and pain to her family. And I was so taken aback. And I didn't, so I said the things that you said. I said that was completely not my intention. I was trying to do X and Y and make sure that it was a safe community for all of us. And but I also said that I'm so sorry. I didn't, I'm trying to think exactly what I said because it worked. I said, I'm so sorry that it caused that for your family. I didn't know that. If I had known that it would cause that pain for your family, I never would have done it. And I'm so, so sorry. And I was. I mean, I said that wasn't my intention, but I clearly it caused pain for her family. And it was whatever the value of my post, and I think it had some value, but if I had known it would cause that pain, absolutely, I never would have done it. What I was trying to achieve was not worth the effect that it had on her and her family. So I think maybe because she was a stranger, maybe because I was so caught off guard, I was completely able to hear what it had caused. And I was so sincere in my apology. And she saw the sincerity, and she immediately accepted my apology. And and then we just started communicating in a completely different way as fellow moms in Tina. And I'm just really thinking about that, and I think I'm going to sort of keep that up as a lesson, because again, it's so much harder with family, right? You're emotionally invested in the people that you're talking about, but still, something about that situation, I was in this very pure way able to hear what it had done in her life, and I really was sorry, and so the forgiveness that I asked for, she granted. For what it's worth, I don't know if it's helpful.
Good work.